How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful, but this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If only it were the other way. If it were I who was to be always young and the picture who would grow old. For that I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that.
Vulgar, unclean, poisonous, depraved, so boring I could vomit. These are some of the actual reviews that Oscar Wilde's first novel received when it was first released. And he never wrote another one. I wonder why. Book sales were awful, the reviews were worse, and it wasn't until many years later that this book started to be seen in a different light and began to be praised as a classic. Today, I'm going to be talking about The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And let's start with the cover, shall we? Is it going to come into focus? Yes. Okay, so you see that cover? That is not how I picture Dorian Gray. Actually, I think that bloke looks more like Jordan Pickford. No disrespect to Jordan Pickford, but he's not known to be David Beckham. So this story is about an incredibly beautiful man in the city of London who is living a bit of a charmed existence. Everybody that comes into contact with him just falls head over heels in love with him, including a painter by the name of Basil Hallward. He becomes so enraptured with Dorian Gray that he paints his portrait, and he really takes special care. He puts all of his heart and soul and love into this portrait, and because of that, somehow, it takes on a special ability or a special significance. Dorian Gray, when he looks at the painting, is overcome with this overwhelming sadness because he suddenly realizes this is the youngest and possibly the most beautiful that I will ever look. But the painting will be forever young. And he kind of becomes jealous of the painting. Dorian Gray thinks to himself, if the meaning of life is to be beautiful and to enjoy beautiful things, then that means that the meaning of my life is slipping away from me. And so he makes a kind of wish. It's just an intention that he has. He just says, I would give my soul if we could reverse places, if I could stay forever young and the picture would age. And whatever force is responsible for it, that deal is made. I mean, these days we've got Botox, right? But back then they had to make deals with demons and stuff. It was really a different time. So as Dorian goes out and enjoys his life and kind of lives a life of debauchery and sin by Victorian standards, he stays young. None of his late nights are drawing down his eyes. He's not getting bad skin from smoking or drinking or doing all the things that he loves to do of a nighttime. All of the effects of this kind of wild lifestyle are all taking their toll on the painting, and his skin remains pure as porcelain. The opening scenes of this book invites us into a world of decadence and luxury. As soon as we step into Basil's studio, the atmosphere is thick. Even the language is very lavish. You can sink your teeth into it. If you enjoy good, dense prose, very ornate language, then you're probably going to enjoy this. I've complained a little bit about it in some of my other classic horror novels that I've reviewed, but in this book, it's kind of fitting, right? Because the whole book is not so much about a plot, really. The plot is quite basic. It's more about aesthetics. The scene is beautiful, but more than that, the language used to describe the scene is beautiful. Everything is about beauty. It's here that we're introduced to two characters who are friends, but they have very different philosophies of life, and that is Basil Hallward and Lord Henry. It's quite interesting to meet these two characters who are friends, but are completely at opposite ends of the scale. So you've got, for example, Basil Hallward's philosophy of life, which is to live in service to something greater to yourself, greater than yourself. He has dedicated his life to the pursuit of creating beautiful art, whereas Lord Henry, on the other hand, sees life as something not that you need to add to, but that you should take from. He thinks that life is like a juicy peach. You just take a bite and it doesn't matter what happens to the peach because you got to enjoy the taste. He lives a life of pure hedonism, and he kind of sees societal rules as constraints that aren't really necessary. They're just rules that other people made up to stop us from enjoying ourselves. He's not going to let traditional ideas of what is wrong and what is right stop him from living the life that he wants to live while he's here. I think a lot of us probably hold both ideas. We don't think that we should live our life completely in service to something, but we also probably would find it a bit selfish to just only want to satisfy ourselves. But these are two extremes, two opposite sides of the same coin. And it's through the use of these two yin and yang kind of forces that Oscar Wilde is basically setting the table and saying, this is what we're going to be talking about. This is what the book is about. So get ready. Here comes the main character. And in enters Dorian Gray. And basically, he's Lord Henry and Basil are like the little angel and devil on his shoulder. And they're both trying to influence him. One of the things that really stands out when you're reading The Picture of Dorian Gray is that Oscar Wilde is ever present. There was no point that I was reading this book and just getting lost in the story. I was always aware of Oscar Wilde, any kind of witticism, any kind of societal observation that was made. It just made me think, Oscar Wilde's pretty funny, isn't he? Not laugh out loud funny, but that kind of funny where you have an exhalation through your nostrils. Do you know what I'm saying? Kind of like this. Exactly like that. Perfect reenactment. Sometimes you read a book to enjoy the story and escape into another world. And sometimes you read a book in the same way that you listen to a story from a friend, where the telling of the story becomes more important than the story itself. And I think that's kind of how I feel about this book. The problem with hearing the author's voice is that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The book starts to become a collection of Oscar Wilde quotes, basically. I think every piece of dialogue that I heard from Lord Henry, every time I read something from him, I felt as though I was making direct eye contact with Oscar Wilde. It was kind of like this, like, all good Americans go to Paris when they die, and all bad Americans go to America. Marriage is hardly something one can do once in a while, except in America. When one is in love, one begins deceiving oneself and ends with deceiving others. And we call it romance. What are American dry goods? They're novels from America. Mate, what's his problem with America? But to be honest, as much as Oscar Wilde makes some fun of America, any time that he does, it's always light-hearted, it's always tongue-in-cheek, and the real target in this book is actually Victorian England. The moral righteousness and the repression of the time, and more than anything, the hypocrisy of Victorians. He just finds it all really silly. So yeah, I know I've spoken about him a lot, but Lord Henry steals the show. Basil is okay. He's kind of is really more of a symbol of righteousness, I think. And Dorian Gray is narcissistic, but for me, not really in a fun way. He's having pleasure, but he's not having fun. Still though, I mean, I was enjoying the book up until chapter 11. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but in chapter 11, Dorian is given a book which completely changes his worldview. The book is unnamed, but I think it's commonly believed to be Against Nature by a writer, and I'm going to try and pronounce his name, and if I don't pronounce it correctly, you can't make fun of me, Joris Karl Huysmans. And this chapter of transformation is long. I mean, it's like that meme, you know, this is a meeting that could have been an email. This is a chapter, a long chapter, that could have been a few paragraphs. It's really rare for me to be able to actually point at a page and say, this is where I stopped enjoying the story. Normally it's something that kind of happens gradually over time. I start to get a little bit bored and then it gets increasing. This was immediate. I'm liking it, I'm liking it, I'm liking it. I don't like it. I don't like it no more. I couldn't help but feel like Oscar Wilde is much more comfortable kind of pontificating on society and, you know, making sharp observations than he is about building the framework of a novel, you know, with a beginning and a middle and an end. I was enjoying myself up to chapter 11 and then I stopped, and then I never enjoyed myself again during the rest of the book. The funny thing is that after chapter 11, you could make an argument that that's when all the interesting stuff happens. You know, the rest is all build up and tension. And then chapter 11 is like a moment of transformation. And then everything after that seems really action packed. But for whatever reason, I just preferred the build up and the building of tension and the finding out about the characters in the world rather than the payoff. It's really important to me that I don't have to like the characters, but I need to be invested in the characters and I need to want an outcome. I would recommend this book to you if you enjoy lavish prose, beautiful settings, heavy symbolism, and social commentary. I think you would enjoy this book. If you are someone that enjoys a narrative, someone who's more into the plot and the characters that are taking a journey, then this probably wouldn't be for you, really. This is book 7 of 10 of the classic horrors that I'm going to be reading this month. The next book was going to be Halloween Party by Agatha Christie, and I have read that book already, but I've decided that actually, no, we're going to make a little switcheroo. We're going to change things up a little bit. We're not going to, or I'm not going to be reviewing Halloween Party because it's just not classic horror. It's not, and this isn't really classic horror either, but it is gothic fiction, and there's horror elements in it. So I think that's okay. That's justified. But Halloween Party, pure murder mystery. What I'm going to be reading instead is The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs, much more classic horror, and it's really short as well. I'm pretty sure you can find it for free online if you want to read it, and if you'd like to see my review for The Monkey's Paw, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching this review. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy reading.